It was Halloween night. My parents had just left with my little brother to go to a party at the middle school. I didn't go because I was in the 11th grade and just spent the day drowning from essays and tests, so I wasn't in the mood to spend my night watching kids scream in terror from people in rubber masks and styrofoam skeletons. Once they left, I hopped on the couch and scrolled through the horror channels. I eventually found a movie that seemed interesting, The Not So Good Dead, directed by Sam Raimi. I put the bright orange candy bowl on the porch and started to watch the movie. And I couldn't focus. I was too worried about my family. Halloween was never my favorite holiday. Even trick-or-treating never piqued my interest, not even as a kid. Especially with all the disappearances happening in the city. The Halloween before, 5 teenagers and an entire family went missing. 2 weeks later, the police found the body of a missing teenager, if you could even call it a body, and their head was missing. And they were missing their intestines. The police say it was most likely an animal, like a bear or a wolf that came down from the mountains and caught them on their way home. The other teenagers in the missing family have still not been found to this day. But the loved ones of the missing have accepted that they are gone and they're never coming back. As I was stuck in my train of thought, the grandfather clock my dad kept struck 9. I didn't think much of it until I realized that my family should have been back hours ago, and my mind started to assume the worst had happened. I sprung up from the couch and raced to my cell phone, but before I could reach it, I heard a knock on the front door. No kid should have been out at that time, so why was someone knocking on the door? If it was my mom or dad, they have a key to the house, so they wouldn't need to knock. It must have been some kids ding-dong ditching houses. That was my thought until there was a second set of knocks. I ignored all my instincts and decided to call my dad. With the dial of the first 3 numbers, there was a loud bang on the door. I continued to dial until a loud, rapid bang started to hit the door. I frantically dialed the rest of the numbers and pressed call, and what I heard made my blood run cold. I held the phone to my ear. No service. As I removed the phone from my ear, I noticed the banging had stopped. I turned to look at the door and froze. Looking at me from the mail slot of the door was a glassy, white eye. When our eyes locked, the mail slot closed, making a loud clank that echoed through the house. Then I heard footsteps walk away from the door into the distance. But I could still feel its ominous presence. I thought it was over. Then the power to the house cut off. My reaction was to kneel and keep quiet. What was probably just seconds felt like hours in the darkness of the empty house. When I got a hold of my nerves, I slowly and scarcely stood up. Then I collected myself with all the strength I had left and said, Who's there? When I finished the question, footsteps rushed to the door and they started banging, kicking, and even scratching at the door. Whatever it wasn't going to stop until it got to me. That was clear. I started to take a step back. Then I let out a screeching noise that was a mix of a bat and a deer. No human being could make a noise as terrifying as that. The door started to crack and bend from the force of the creature. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't have time to decide. The door broke off the hinges, falling to the ground, making a loud sound of wood hitting tile. I ran to the kitchen to arm myself. I grabbed a knife from the drying rack, and I turned around to see what had broken down the door. Nothing. There was nothing there. Just the broken door. But that wasn't the part that scared me. What scared me was that past the door, there was nothing. No light. No houses. Not even the street. It was just a thick fog that swallowed my home. There was a sound from above my head. A scraping sound, claws ripping up the drywall of the ceiling. I I didn't need to look up because the creature dropped in front of me. It wasn't human. Its flesh was falling off the bones. Its arms were so long they were touching the floor, and a horrid smell of roadkill filled my nose. As I struggled not to vomit at the sight, I noticed it wasn't looking at me. It was facing up and looking at the freshly made claw marks in the ceiling and smiling with genuine joy. It then made a sound that still haunts my soul to this day. It was a whining sound, almost like an animal, but at the same time, not even close. I tried to take a step back, but with the creak of the floorboard, the creature snapped its neck downwards to look at me. I was so caught off guard that I fell back. When I hit the ground, the noise stopped, and I looked up. Now I could see its face. Its skull was wrapped in rotting flesh and dark veins. I vomited from the mixture of sight and smell. The creature then let out a cackle, almost like a hyena, as if it found the enjoyment of seeing me in that state. Once I was done being sick, I dashed through the stairs, but before I could make it up to the first step, the creature, with what felt like a truck, slapped me on the back of its skinny and rotted hand. I was sent flying to the other side of the kitchen, with no doubt that I knew my arm was broken. I looked to my right and saw the knife, and the creature slowly walked up to me. I grabbed the knife with my non-broken arm and pointed the knife towards the creature, ready for the end. I closed my eyes, accepting my fate, counting my last breaths. I hear the creature smelling the air. Whatever scent the creature caught was making it salivate. The creature then looked towards the cabinet and rushed it with an animalistic movement. With both hands, the creature ripped off the cabinet door at its hinges. Cereals and snacks fly across the kitchen. The creature then pulls out an old bag of candy corn that no one ate, starts walking towards the broken front door. Before the creature makes it to the door, it stops and looks at the puddle of vomit on the floor and starts playing with it. It then picks up a piece of chocolate from the puddle, looks at it, and says in my own but demonic voice, "Bad candy," then rushes out the door into the fog. The moment the creature left, the entire house shook. I stumbled to look out the window and see the fog had dissipated. My legs finally gave out and I collapsed to the floor. While I was fighting to stay awake, I heard the shattering of a window. It was my newly widowed neighbor. I could hear his screams and him begging for his life. And I heard the slashing and ripping of flesh along the screams of agony. I then blacked out from exhaustion. I was then woken up by the calling of my frantic dad. "Are you okay?" I couldn't see well, but I could make out the tears in my dad's eyes and the silhouette of my mom and brother crying. I then woke up in the hospital with a cast and bandages on my ribs. I still had the screams of my neighbor ringing in my ears. The police ended up asking my family questions. My family chalked it up to a robbery gone wrong. I also said it was a robbery because no way was anyone going to believe me anyways. But I know everything that happened that night. Afterward, everything seemed to be back to normal. I was still having nightmares every week. I eventually told them about the night, but they told me that I was watching too many scary movies. A couple weeks later, they found my neighbor's body. And it was like the missing teenagers. But this time, in place of his intestines was candy corn. A new family moved into his house a month later. Hopefully, they won't have to experience the horror like I did on Halloween. I wish I could have done more to help him.